using to kick off this series all the way through the opening round of 8, so take it away.
So, Nagar, as we were kind of discussing, you know, on the stage in the last match, there's really only so many ways you can go in this dungeon in terms of creativity and, you know, weird pulls. You know, you have some skips or maybe not skips downstairs in kind of the bottom of the ship, but really from both teams right away, we're going to see this mass pull coming up with Imran right away.
Yeah, we actually see the Mage and the Warlock coming out, so two ranged, very different to the setups that we saw beforehand with the triple melee. We see the triple melee coming out of Fetchite, yes, though.
A bit of safety as well for the ranged, because there's a lot of that splash damage that we always kind of keep referring to in this dungeon, and truthfully it is very dangerous. We do have a bot that can go out, of course, on Muscle Bra, the Windwalker on Team PogChamp. Fatshark, yes, opting to use their Bloodlust, whilst Team PogChamp is saving it, likely for that trash after Harbor Run, so we have to keep an eye on when exactly they use it.
Yeah, and as you said earlier, there's not very different pulls you can do, but we saw some very interesting stuff coming out of Team Revolted earlier. We see the Mage actually doing a lot of damage here, Dr.
That is a good Mage. Let's play in an excellent
But there comes the Windwalker.
Yeah, I mean, the Windwalker and the Mage, but you know, he's outputting, I mean, really comparable damage to the Windwalker. I mean, peaking out at around 30-35 mil there. Tons of damage coming out of the Havoc, and honestly, not as much from the Windwalker on the Fatshark yes side. I'm not sure why. I mean, it is similar pulls, and we do know Windwalkers are gods of both AoE and single target, but I was expecting to see a bit more damage coming out of them compared to the Windwalker over on Team PogChamp, and especially compared to the 3 Windwalkers that we saw in the previous series.
We also see, though, that Imran is a lot lower for Team Fatshark yes than it is for PogChamp, and to be honest, it might just be because of the Rogue. We see always in the damage meters the Rogue doesn't seem to do that much damage compared to other classes, but it is because the Rogue actually does a lot of single target damage while the other classes do a lot of AoE. So the Rogue is not actually doing really bad, he's actually doing a lot of single target damage, which is important, as we can see the boss dying really fast.
Yeah, I mean, right you are. The boss does go down 15% ahead of Team PogChamp. Fatshark, yes, now moving down to this more dangerous pull in the kind of the belly of the ship, and they're actually pulling the dogs with it too, so a slightly larger pull than we're accustomed to seeing. After this, I do expect that they will be skipping the Mariner and that Grime Lord, but really dangerous pull. I mean, we say it every time. It's a really close, confined space here, not a lot of real estate for the players. They do have to not only dodge the dogs that are now jumping and cleaving, but you got the Quaking, you got the Defiant Strike, you have the Swift Blades doing their warp cast, and then on top of it, you also have the 6-pound barrels just rolling around.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of stuff going on, especially for melee players. Dodge everything, and as you said, Quaking and Daphix is coming in here. Both teams, it's a pretty similar pull here. They're also pulling the dogs here on Team PogChamp. It's just going to be interesting to see what they do afterwards. As I said earlier, as I mentioned, that Team Revolted actually did kill the Mariner, which we don't see very often, and then they skipped the Grand Lord with the Shroud, so they didn't have to do the whole suicide and resting up thing, because the Mariner actually does have stealth detection, while the Grand Lord does not. So if you kill the Mariner, you can actually stealth past.
Interesting here, they're actually skipping around the Mariner with that stealth detection, so they're just staying out of its combat range. Really well done by Fatshark, yes, so kind of taking what you just said for the strategy for one of the previous teams and taking it up a notch. Fatshark, yes, now pulling the 2 champions likely upstairs to Harboron, as they will have to keep important interrupts on their fears, and of course the Servitor on Harboron. PogChamp now having the pull. The Mage is opting to pull here so that he can invest safely on the side, save them that 5 seconds worth of death. PogChamp warping over with that Warlock Gate to get up the stairs as quickly as they can. The Mage will meet them on the other side, and they too will pull the champions up to Harboron, as we see Fatshark, yes, now prepping to pull.
Yeah, every single second matters here in Maw of Souls, as the timer is very short. It's a very short dungeon in general. So really every single strategy you have, every single small thing that you can do to gain a couple of seconds or two really matters in this dungeon, as we saw earlier as well. And we did see the fastest time out of all teams so far come out of Team Revolted earlier. Yeah,
I think they were 10:40, 10:50, something in that range. So we'll have to keep an eye on what these teams are able to perform. But they indeed did beat the world record set by APAC last week, which I believe was 11:25. So beat it by a fair bit. I mean, 30 seconds is nothing to scoff at here in Maw of Souls. Harboron now at 64% for Fatshark, yes, Team PogChamp. Slowly catching up at 73%. Both teams doing well to get the interrupts on the champions. Probably a bit tougher to do for Team PogChamp, Nagura, because they do have only 2 ranged, so there's the Servitor and 2 champions that constantly need to be interrupted here.
Exactly. As we all know, ranged usually have a longer cooldown on their interrupt, so with the double champions and the boss adds that need to be interrupted, so they're going to have a hard time. But they're doing pretty well so far, and I think the champions are actually about to die just now. So the healer has to heal the double bursting stacks and has to deal with the Quaking as well, and all the other damage going on in this fight. But I think most of the damage is actually dodgeable. As long as you don't get hit by anything on the floor, you can avoid it, except of course the debuff that spawns 4 outside of you does a lot of damage.
As we see that on Muscle Bra right now on Team PogChamp. But I mean, PogChamp really cranking up the damage right now. PogChamp PogChamps in chat. They're surpassing Fat Shark's damage, and I mean, they're down to 30% now. Fat Shark, yes, at 33%, and we still have, of course, the trap card, which is currently being played face down for Team PogChamp. They will pull the entire ship, as will, of course, Fat Shark, yes, but they still have their Bloodlust Nagar, which is likely what they're saving it for.
Exactly. We also see the Bloodlust on Fat Shark, yes, might be ready at the very, very end on Helia. So I don't think we saw Team 1 facing Helia so far.
No, even with the double Bloodlust from Method, last time they didn't manage to one phase, because they only got access to the Bloodlust about halfway through her phase, so they really didn't get the full effect of it.
Exactly, but if a team manages to one phase, that would save a lot of time. As we said, every single second counts in this dungeon. Now we see both bosses are getting really, really low. We're probably going to see some very big pulls coming out, as we saw earlier as well. We just sky step everyone and just pull the whole boat together without the mini boss and just cut it backwards.
Team PogChamp looking to rock the boat here as they pull the entirety of the trash. I don't think they're going to pull Skjall as well. They do pop the Bloodlust, as we alluded to earlier. Is Skjall in there?
I think so. Yes,
so
they did pull him.
Okay, so they pulled everything.
Wow.
I mean, this is the biggest pull you can do on this ship. Once all of this dies, they'll have access to Helia. Fat Shark, yes, just now doing their own pull. Whether or not they pull Skjall, we'll have to see in just a moment. They also have a death up on the board, Nagar, and as you keep saying, rightfully so, every second counts. That's an extra 5 seconds that Fat Shark is going to need to kind of get across. Team PogChamp doing well to maintain here, but they're kind of starting to run out of gas. As we can see, the tank is going to start to need to start running off, likely to play it a bit more defensively if the mobs aren't killed, but actually they are for Team PogChamp. They're doing quite well right now.
Yeah, the fact that they actually pulled the mini boss too, just, we see a death here coming out. Musselbra, the Windwalker died, but luckily all the trash was already dead. It was only the mini boss still alive. We also see Lofis, the other Windwalker in the other group die. The Windwalker's not having a good time right now.
No, I mean, they're not, but this just goes back to what we always keep mentioning at the beginning of this dungeon, and a lot of the mobs down here, oh, hey, Chad. A lot of the mobs down here are very similar to what happens upstairs. You have a lot of splash damage on the melee, and I mean, both sides, they're losing their one of their melees, or the only melee on Team PogChamp. I mean, it just goes to show just how easy it is to dip, and that's why oftentimes for that first pull in this dungeon, you see a pre-bop on the Windwalker or what have you to try and get down a lot of those mobs as they're cleaning Imran down as well. PogChamp now moving over to Helia, finishing up Skjall for the 100%, as Fat Shark, yes, is now only at halfway on Skjall.
Yeah, they did save a lot of time by pulling that boss actually with the trash groups. I mean, they don't really have a rogue, so I guess the Warlock just does a lot of single target damage as well while AoEing. And I guess maybe they just focused it and cleaved off the skull. But yeah, they did a lot of damage and saved them a lot of time by doing this risky pull with the Bloodlust and with the mini boss on top.
Yeah, I mean, and the survivability of the Warlock of Rochelle, one of our friends from the live server, is doing well there. I mean, Warlock's, you know, fairly indestructible. Let's talk about Helia, though, as we are here. A two-phase fight. In this first phase, players will have to kill 6 tentacles, a combination of the Destructors and the Grasping. Grasping don't really do anything. They just kind of sit on the side. The Destructors, though, do a ton of damage to the tank, do need to be tanked, and if nobody's in their melee range, they will pulse for damage on the group. And of course, you have to dodge either side of the ship depending where she's going to cast her frontal.
Yeah, usually you have one person just look for the frontal. Usually the healer, because the healer doesn't need to change his camera angle depending on where the distractor tentacle is, right? So the healer can just call out which direction the whole team has to dodge to. And I don't think it's going to be a problem for these kind of teams as they're, I mean, that's what they do all day, right? Yeah,
Team PogChamp looking really good right now. A lot of damage coming out of Jay, their fire mage. I mean, well, a lot of Ignite spreading here, of course, to these tentacles. They have an excellent second spawn. There's a bit of RNG with that for the Destructor tentacle. The second one does spawn at the front of the ship, allowing for even better cleave on the remaining tentacles that they need to do to get to phase 2. Fat Shark, yes, just now getting to their Helia pull. Helia now going downstairs for Team PogChamp on the left side of the screen. We will have this bit of RP phase where she will shatter the front of the ship, and then we'll start our phase 2.
Yeah, in phase 2, there's the breath that she does that needs to be dodged. It's either middle, left, or right, which shouldn't be a problem for them. Then we also have the Tainted Essence still from phase 1 that also happens in phase 2. And she also does a cast that, if not interrupted, does a huge AoE on the whole raid. So it should be interrupted, but as we said earlier, they probably have very good coordination going on, so it shouldn't be a problem for the interrupt as well.
One would certainly hope so. Now, it is important to note Helia does not actually need to be killed here. She does just need to reach about 70.5%, after which she will end the fight. But about 1 minute into this phase, she will submerge and kind of disappear for about 20-25 seconds, where players will be able to, well, do nothing except try to survive, which is not very hard. You just go to the corners of the ship. There are a couple of spots on the ship where it is safe for, I actually learned from you, Nagar, as I saw you move to the side of the ship and you immediately AFK and alt-tabbed out of the game looking at your cell phone, but it does work quite well. Effective, I've tried it myself.
Okay, so we see Fetcher, I guess, is in phase 2 now as well. They do have Bloodlust. Well, it's still quite a long time, actually. It's still 46 seconds, so the one-phase dream is probably not going to happen.
No, I don't think so.
And we see Team PogChamp 75%. The boss is probably going down. I don't think they can one-phase it at this point, especially without Bloodlust. It's going to be difficult. But they're still very far ahead, so even if she goes down, they should be managed to win at this point. They only have one death as well.
Well, the boss certainly needs to go down, otherwise no one's finishing this dungeon on time. Fat Shark, yes, does have once again that extra death on the board. I mean, they were tied with Team PogChamp for a bit once PogChamp incurred their death on the Windwalker, but they returned a Windwalker death right back in the trash prior to Helia, so they do have that 5 seconds to overcome as well. Team PogChamp now waiting for their transitional phase. She does come up. Now, they're only at 74% on Helia. The 2 teams we saw prior were about 72%, so a bit lower damage coming out of Team PogChamp here, but they do have a lot of burst AoE potential, of course, with that Fire Mage. Not as much sustained single target as the previous teams we saw, such as in Method. Helia should be going down here in just a moment for Team PogChamp.
They did actually pop the Bloodlust here, and they're the last very seconds. They might actually be able to No, they're actually in 72%. Oh, and there it goes. There it goes.
There's not enough. So it looks like Team PogChamp will be taking that first match. And if I'm not mistaken, likely in record time, 10:34 on the board.
Yeah, certainly a very impressive performance there from Team PogChamp. And we saw Fat Shark, yes, kind of pull a little bit ahead in the beginning, but it really seemed to time with how they use that Bloodlust. And then we ended up seeing the Bloodlust come out later from Team PogChamp. And that pull on the actual ship part itself leading up to Skjul ended up kind of being the difference maker.
I mean, except for the Windwalker death, that was just textbook. They pulled everything. They pulled Skjul, which is, for those at home, is the mini-boss at the end of the ship that has just a ton of health, summons skeletons all the time. So it's just a lot of work. Teams often opt to pull all the trash together and then do them separately, but they just save so much time, and they really pulled it off well there. And it showed. I mean, I'm pretty sure they just set the record for the tournament for Maw clear.
Yeah, Fat Shark, yes, did get that Bloodlust back at the end, and we were all kind of thinking maybe the dream happens. Unfortunately, Helia had other plans. She had a busy day ahead of her, had to make some meetings, so unfortunately wasn't able to do so. And it really just goes to show how important of a commodity that Bloodlust is when you're in a dungeon that short. I mean, you basically get to use it once. Again, Theorycraft, maybe you get it a second time, but we've actually yet to see that really pan out that way for any of these winning teams.
Yeah, all the Bloodlust that we saw that got used at the very start, it could get back up like at the very, very end of the dungeon, but only for 10 seconds, and I feel like it's only really worth it if you manage to one-phase Helia, but we didn't see a single team that managed to one-phase, even with that Bloodlust. So it might just be better to do this big pull as we saw out of PogChamp, and just pull the mini-boss and just use the Bloodlust there and just only use one.
I don't think we've seen any team so far of all the regions yet able to one-phase Helia, so maybe they just can't. That's a challenge.
And I mean, we are looking at really just some of the best teams across the planet when it comes to Mythic Plus rating. So yeah, if they're not doing it, it doesn't seem all that likely. Anybody at home is going to be pulling it off. But early advantage to Team PogChamp. Saw myself briefly for a minute, was very confused. We are going to take a short break though, and when we come back, we're going to see if Fat Shark Yes can equalize the series, or if Team PogChamp is going to pull off our second 2-0 of the day. Welcome back. Team PogChamp currently 1-0 in this best-of-3 series. You just need to win one more map, and they will be advancing to that winner's bracket. And I checked my phone during the break. We still have no Photoshop pictures of Nagura Bald. I just want to put it out there. I'm actually extremely disappointed. Let's go ahead and talk about this map, though. It is going to be Fat Shark Yak pick, or Fat Shark, yes.
It's the thought of Nagura Bald that makes me slip my words as well.
Anyway, Fat Shark, yes pick, and they're going to be heading to Court of Stars, and it's going to be the Volcanic affix. So, Court of Stars last year, I felt like we all kind of agreed that with certain affixes, this could be a pretty difficult map at points. You know, what do you think, though, with the affixes we have here?
I think the affixes in general are not very difficult, especially because it picked Volcanic. Volcanic is an affix that is like, meh, it doesn't really do much as long as you dodge it, as long as there's no stun coming out or anything. But it is tyrannical, and there's no buffs in that dungeon except the Rogue Vial. So you can use...
Which I believe everyone can use.
Everyone can use, you don't need the profession for it. But there's no other buffs, and a lot of people underestimate how good the buffs are in that dungeon. So if you don't have the buffs and it is tyrannical, the last two bosses actually do a lot of damage, so it might be difficult.
Yeah, it's kind of what we saw, as I was saying last year when we did see Court of Stars come out. We didn't necessarily see it a ton, but we did see some teams actually have a little bit of difficulty with it.
I think the teaming affix is probably the only one that could kind of throw teams for a loop here, because Volcanic certainly isn't like a curveball affix. It's just kind of well, we have to pick something, and this speaks to me more as definitely as a comfort pick coming out of this team from Fat Shark, yes, rather than a curveball to the other team. But the teaming is really the one that teams will have to they'll have to watch it. Like, it's not my fault. It's just called the teaming, all right? That they'll have to watch out for, because we have, you know, the constructor packs, we have the double inquisitor packs now. So there's a lot of dangerous trash going around the courtyard area after the first boss.
Yeah, certainly something to be mindful of. Now, you mentioned that the Volcanic pick, it is certainly not a difficult affix. And when you look at the pool, there were certainly, I mean, you could have gotten Necrotic. There were areas you could have gone if you thought, okay, let's make it more difficult, and we're just going to prove that, you know, we're the team that can handle this affix. So definitely kind of speaks to Fat Shark Yes's mentality when, again, they do just kind of go with the wet noodle Volcanic in an effort to not trip themselves up either.
I mean, a lot of teams, at least last time around when I participated myself, a lot of teams assumed they're going to win the first pick and then only practice for the third and just didn't really practice everything, because it does take a lot of time to practice every single dungeon on every level, every affix combination. It's a lot of practice that you need to do. So a lot of teams might not actually practice for losing the first round. So maybe that's what happened, and they just picked the Volcanic because, like, as you said, a comfort pick, and Volcanic doesn't do much, so it doesn't change things up that much at all.
I like how we're talking about, you know, standing in Volcanic stuff as being comfortable. Yeah, it absolutely is. It's, as we said, the degree of difficulty that it kind of contributes is certainly really not that noticeable compared to some of the other options you could have gone with.
And actually, I guess they were trying to throw them off a bit because Dr. J's team, the Team PogChamp, does have the two casters, so perhaps it disturbs them a bit with the Volcanic. Not so much that they'll get hit, but it will constantly displace them when they're trying to cast a bit more than the melee would. So maybe there was a bit of strategy involved here, but I think overall mostly it's just a comfort pick, and it's just going to be which team, you know, destroys everything faster. With the tyrannical setting, we'll definitely have to look out for Talixay. Not so much the second boss. I assume teams on the 22 won't have too much trouble with it, but really it'll come down to their Melandra strategies on the last boss.
Yeah, I do want to talk a little bit about the compositions again. This is a difference this year where once teams select their comps, they do have to stick for the rest of the series. What do you make of Team PogChamp's comp with the double range there?
PogChamp.
Oh, I guess that was always going to happen. Yeah, bye. That's the Mythic Dungeon Invitational. Seriously, though.
I'm not, you know, Nagura and I were just talking during the break, too. We know Dr. J, he plays in our guild, and he's well known for Mage, and he has been practicing Windwalker a lot. But, I mean, the comfort pick for Mage, I mean, really showed there. He kept his own with the damage. He kept up with the Monk on the first pull. I'm not shocked to see that Shella, the Warlock, again, that's his pick on live. So, you know, we talked a lot this tournament because the fact that the classes are locked in, that we would see a lot of players playing with their comfort picks rather than perhaps what's flavor of the month. And I think in this team, we're really seeing that there.
Yeah, I also think they picked a really good dungeon, though, to counter this double range comp. As it is Court of Stars, there's a lot of single target going on, as there's the Enforcers that you need to pretty much solo kill, the mini-bosses, then there's the free bosses. So not too much AoE coming out in that dungeon. And double Windwalker plus Rogue, that's just so much single target damage.
All right, well, we're going to hop into this match. Again, it's going to be Court of Stars. This is Fat Shark Yes's pick. I'm going to mess up that name like 84 times. Just have to slow it down.
84.
But 84 specific.
0.5.
Round down. Yeah, but we are going to hop into it and start things off with a little bit of a magical boat ride as we head into Suramar.
Yeah, so nothing really to talk about except for the romantic boat ride at the very beginning. Oh, okay. So we're actually going to not talk about the boat ride. I mean, we could talk about the boat ride, Rob.
I mean, we could still
We've
talk
had one
about
together.
the
It's
boat
been
ride.
quite lovely.
It's, you know, it's one of my favorite parts of this whole expansion. It's just, you know, hanging out with...
Really?
That would be upsetting.
Yeah, you know what? I think Suramar's really pretty. I enjoyed the boat ride in. You know, I like what I like. That and battle pets. Come on.
I can't talk about that one. I'm sorry.
That's fair. I'm our resident pet collector and mount collector guy up here. But I did, you know, do +5 Mythic one day, so...
You need to slow down. Was it the beginning of the expansion or now?
It was I think probably around the last MDI.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Since then I hover around like +3. I don't like to get too stressful.
So, talking about Court of Stars, in the meantime, what do you think is going to be some of those most dangerous pulls here? Because, you know, as you mentioned, the kind of single target advantage that Fat Shark Yes will have, I wouldn't be shocked to see, because there is a lot. I mean, it's not like you can't pull some of the trash with the Enforcers and those mini bosses, so they might tailor their comp to that strength that they have with the Fire Mage to try and pull some of the trash along with the Enforcer and what have you. The problem then, of course, is we did talk about how dangerous some of that trash can be. I mean, Inquisitors, you constantly have to babysit them, stuns, interrupts, you know, displacements with grip.
Yeah, there's a lot of different pulls you can do as well in Court of Stars. What we see a lot on live servers, at least, is that they pull the harbor at the very start of the dungeon to the left where you go downwards. And they do like a very big pull, and Bloodlust sometimes even, but on Tyrannical probably not. They probably save it for later on. But on 45 you just Bloodlust, pull everything together. But as we don't have the RNG coming in from the buffs this time around, because sometimes people are like, oh, if we get the Engineering Orb, then we don't do this pull, but if we get it, we do this pull, right? So there's a little bit less RNG involved with the buffs, but the Enforcer spawns are still random. So the Enforcer can spawn very good for you, or it can spawn in on the completely other side and everyone has to walk over. So they have to improvise a little bit in the middle of the dungeon. They can't just have this straight comp where you do this or that. Like, you have to decide in the middle of the dungeon depending on where it spawns the Enforcer.
And well, we have seen some teams, especially when they don't have a favorable spawn to those Enforcers. I feel like I'm leaving you out. When they don't have a favorable spawn to the Enforcers, Rob, oftentimes you'll see likely the healer actually run off across the dungeon, pick up the Enforcer, and bring it back to the rest of the team as they're finishing up whatever trash it may be. Healer usually doing the least amount of damage output, unless, of course, it's a Holy Paladin burst damaging on a single target.
Yeah, for sure, when you approach this dungeon, you have to be aware of these things, and obviously these teams, at this level, you would be surprised if they were surprised by it. But we need to talk about how Team PogChamp's composition does maybe go into this, and I was going to say we can talk about Fat Shark Yes's comp, but we're actually ready. Take 2. We're going to go for that magical boat ride. It's happening this time.
Again.
Oh, God. It's a whole new world. If only it was a carpet. But unfortunately, we are stuck with a boat, Nagura, as we go towards this dungeon right now. So, as you mentioned, I think we're probably going to see something similar. We're just going to see Harbor pull right away off the bat and some kind of CC on this first mob. Both teams do have that Repentance that can come out of the Paladin. But we do have a lovely boat ride right now for about 30 seconds, so we can discuss anything you'd like, early.
Yeah, it's actually beautiful. As you can see the water here and the scenery, it's beautiful. Now the boats are here, so we can see everyone. The magical boat ride is happening right now. What do you think?
They do get on the boat. Unfortunately, T-Pain is not there to join them in the meantime. Team PogChamp, in the meantime, Nagura chat. They do head over. You know, we will see a skip from this first mob. It's really inefficient to kind of DPS it by itself and cleave it down. We'll likely see the Repentance coming out, or in the case of Fat Shark, yes, we will see that in prison coming from the DH. They'll head upstairs, deal with that first scout, and then likely I would expect the first CDs and massive pull to be on that harbor area. One of the most dangerous mobs there, of course, though, being that cat.
Oh, yeah. The cat actually...
Yes.
Yes.
Well, then.
Back to you, Slut. No, the cat actually said, there's many cats in very different dungeons, and they pretty much do all the same thing. They do a leap on a ranged target, and if it hits you, it actually does a lot of damage. Most cats are interruptible, like they can be gripped backwards, or vortex, or typhoon, or even stunned. Some cats still do the damage even if you grip them, but those cats in Court of Stars actually can be interrupted, and they won't do their damage if you interrupt them with like a grip or something like that.
Yeah, you can time that grip really well. Fat Shark, yes, right away with a mass stealth here, actually opting not to do the harbor skip that we were discussing. They do pull the worms that we do see. Oftentimes, actually, usually have to be pulled as they get near that scout tower. They'll have to deactivate it. And their first big pull actually comes here on the bridge right in front of the first boss.
Yeah, so they... we see actually Team PogChamp also doing the same pull, so none of the teams are pulling the harbor, which is interesting. But what we saw sometimes is that after the first boss, the healer goes to trigger the event to open the door, and then the team goes back and does the harbor pull without the healer. So maybe both teams are choosing to do that instead of.
Seb doing well there. The Blood DK on Team PogChamp side and pre-AMSing that torch throw from those scavs does a ton of damage. So doing well there as he pulls all the trash together to pre-AMS, making sure he doesn't proc that Purgatory or worse yet, die right before Fat Shark Yes moving over to the next pack. Now, in a teaming environment, we have almost double the amount of mobs here. We still have the one construct, but we have double the Arcane Anomalies and, of course, the Guardians on the edge. And they pull the first boss all along with this.
So yeah, they're actually pulling the first boss. They did not use Bloodlust yet, which is interesting to note. I think he's still actually, he's disabling some beacons still, as we can see the Holy Paladin walk around with his buff. I'm wondering what they saved their Bloodlust for. It's quite interesting to see.
I mean, they would have popped it by now.
Yeah, they would have. They would have. We see Team PogChamp actually does use the Bloodlust, and they're just pulling the boss by itself, I believe, or they pulled some guards with it. Yeah, they actually pulled some guards, yeah.
So the patrol captain, we do have to discuss, of course, will essentially die at 25% as the players have activated that flask near the center of the room. Once he goes and takes a swig of that, he will unfortunately be met with his demise, as it is not a delicious drink there. It is poison. He will die. He will summon mobs throughout the fight. Actually, one time in the fight, depending on how many towers are left active by the players, as you can see some of them, and those will cast stuns on players, so it's important to babysit them and stun them. Of course, this Street Sweeper ability, as we saw on the right side of the screen on Fat Shark Yes, will hit players with arcane damage if they don't move out of the way, targeting the closest player to the spawn. And finally, Nagura, we do have that huge double cone coming out of the boss in kind of that hourglass shape that will stun you if it hits you.
Yeah, so a lot of things to dodge here, but it's not very difficult as long as the animation works properly, then it's fine. Then we see, obviously, then we see both teams disabled all the beacons except one, I believe, so you only have one ad to deal with. If you disable every single beacon, you don't get any ads, but the very last boss actually has a longer RP if you disable all the beacons, so most teams choose to just have one beacon up, and it's also good to have one extra ad for the rogue damage or multi-dotting, proccing Cephos, and so on.
I believe you can actually overcome that longer RP even if you get all the towers by purposely failing the Guess Who game, but teams definitely don't want to be doing that. And you know what, actually a bit of an advantage here that we didn't really discuss at the beginning of the map, with having that Demon Hunter for Fat Shark Yes and that Guess Who game. For them, they'll be able to just get the 5 clues right away, and they'll be able to use that Spectral Sight immediately and see the demon, whereas Team PogChamp will unfortunately need to use their eyeballs, read the text on the screen, and then guess the correct evil demon that is lurking amongst them. Fat Shark Yes, now typically we see here, after the first boss dies, the teams will kind of backpedal and go all the way to the start of the dungeon where the gate will open, but that is only triggered if one player does this initial run here. Usually the Holy Paladin does it as they run over, die, and then release and res with the rest of the players where that gate will open.
So they still have Bloodlust ready, which actually they do not have Bloodlust ready. We see it right now. Oh, they used it for the harbor pull. That's what we said earlier, right? So the Paladin goes and triggers, opens the door, and in the meantime, so that's why they saved the Bloodlust, because they don't have the healer with them, and they just want to kill this very, very fast, because obviously without a healer, it's very difficult to not die. And obviously they also need to interrupt everything properly, as this is a very big pull coming in.
Yeah, so no problem from them. The healer does die on purpose, as we mentioned. The RP has been triggered. Fat Shark Yes downs the rest of the harbor pull and heads over to the backside of the dungeon, dealing with that last sentry that they opted to skip at the beginning of the dungeon with the mass stealth. Of course, it doesn't matter now for the tower. The first boss has already been killed. Team PogChamp on the left side of the screen already prepping to get their pull in on the side, but there's a huge trash differential between the two teams now as a result of that pull, 25%.
Yeah, so we see Team PogChamp is waiting. I think they're waiting for, as there's a lot of patrols in Court of Stars, very, very big patrols, and you sometimes just need to wait until they are in the perfect position. As we see a very big pull coming out of Team PogChamp here. They pulled the whole bridge with the patrol, and the imps and the mobs passed. Like, that's a very, very big pull to handle. I mean, it's not fortified, it is tyrannical, and we can see a lot of damage coming out of Dr. J, infinite damage coming out of Dr. J.
I mean, a lot of damage coming in on Fat Shark Yes, not from, I mean, from Fat Shark Yes too, but, you know, that was a really peculiar position to pull the Enforcer. Usually you want to tag the Enforcer and pull him around one of the corners so that the healer, and even the melee, everybody except for the tank, can kind of safely line of sight the Enforcer as it does its infernal explosion. The team opting to just kind of eat the damage to the face there, no problem for them. Fat Shark Yes using efficiency to their advantage here as they get the first mini-boss. You do have to strip Talixay, the second boss, of all of her kind of commanders, her mini-bosses, to get rid of all those speed and health and damage buffs. So they're working on the first one, which spawns after you kill an Enforcer, and they opt to kill it with some trash on the side, as does Team PogChamp with their first Enforcer. Yeah,
Team PogChamp unfortunately had the first Enforcer on the other side of the dungeon, so they had to go over and pull the Enforcer. They did pull the imps with it, and as we can see here as well, the team's up to not line of sight the explosion, just because, as we said, it is tyrannical and not fortified.
Just because they can.
Because they can, and the healer is just out healing the damage. it does save a little. It gets you a little bit more damage if people don't have to line of sight. Of course, especially for the melee that doesn't have to walk all the way out of melee range. And of course, the range don't have to move, so it gives you a little bit of damage.
Yeah, so they're just opting to choose that kind of riskier, so to speak, play for that extra damage. Definitely a good point there. Fat Shark, yes, working to kill their second Enforcer now. Keeping in mind, of course, this dungeon does not have any of the random RNG, or the RNG elements to it that will sometimes help spawn one of these mini bosses without the need to kill an Enforcer. But in this case, we don't have this available. 3 Enforcers do need to die while they grab the mini bosses. Now, Nagara, this is probably the most annoying of the 3 mini bosses here, especially for a damage dealer. It will channel that beam on one of the players.
Yeah, so one of the players, it can be any player except the healer, I believe. Any DPS or the tank can get the beam on them. You are able to line of sight it, but you have to line of sight it while it gets casted on you. So you only have, I think, less than a second to manage to line of sight. So you need to position yourself properly to go behind a pillar right away, and it will rechannel the cast. And you just do it as many times until the tank gets targeted. Because of course the tank is tankier than everyone else, as it is the tank, obviously. Right. And it also gives a debuff that decreases your damage then. So having that debuff on a DPS, obviously you don't want that.
Right, sure. Nagura, the eyeball boss, going down for Fat Shark. Yes, one of the star pupils of the dungeon. Team PogChamp moving around the backside of Talixay, as unfortunately they did have one of those Enforcer spawns that you spoke about. Literally couldn't have spawned any worse. If you're having a bird's eye view down of the dungeon, the Enforcer can spawn in either the top left, top right, bottom left, or bottom right. In the case of Team PogChamp here, they did have their first spawn in the bottom left, and now have to move all the way to the top right in that theoretical bird's eye view. They are opting actually to use LOS, line of sight, here on this Enforcer. Not sure what's different this time. Perhaps it's the extra danger of having the trash along with them, but the Inquisitor specifically, which does a lot of splash damage.
Yeah, the Inquisitor is a very dangerous mob in this dungeon, as it spawns those eyes. You can have the eyes not spawn if you interrupt his cast properly. I think it got changed. Usually if you stun the cast instead of interrupting it, then the eyes would spawn anyway, but I think it got changed now, so even if you stun, the eyes won't spawn.
Yeah, so you can appropriately crowd control it. Indeed, the last Enforcer on Fat Shark Airs on the right side of the screen will be going down momentarily. Enforcers give without teaming 6%, but we are in a teaming environment, so I think it's about 4.5. Nonetheless, Fat Shark, yes, will have a bit over capping percentage once they kill this Enforcer. Nothing too bad, really. I mean, they probably just killed one extra mob. A lot of percentage from the boss-style mobs in here. Team PogChamp only now working on their eyeball mini-boss, but Fat Shark, yes, is 1 cycle ahead of them already.
Yeah, they're actually quite ahead at this point. The one thing I don't really like too much about Fat Shark, yes, as you said, they're overkilling trash a little bit, as they pull even more mobs to this mini-boss. Of course, it's probably for the rogue, so it actually goes faster to kill a mini-boss if you have extra ads there. But one thing to mention is that you said earlier, you have Spectral Sight from the Demon Hunter coming out, and what we saw some teams do is after the second boss, the Demon Hunter goes in by himself and talks to all the spies, and then he does it by himself while the rest of the team just kills some trash to get the extra percentage that you still need for the enemy forces. But as they already have 100%, they can't really do that, and they just have to go in as 5 players and just do the game with everyone.
Yeah, certainly they could have bought a bit more efficiency doing what you're saying, but, you know, maybe they'll do it anyway for fun just to teach you a lesson and they'll get 110% trash. Probably not. Team PogChamp moving over to their third Enforcer. This time a favorable spawn for them. And once again, in that view that we had earlier that I was discussing, the Enforcer spawned essentially next door to where the second one spawned, so bit of time save there for them. Fat Shark, yes, now moving over to pull the second boss, Talixay Flame Wreath for the dungeon. Nothing too hard here, Nagura, but we are in a tyrannical setting, and the longer this fight goes on, the harder her AoE fire damage pulses.
Yeah, she also does some other very dangerous abilities, especially the imp spawn, where you have to be careful with, because if the imps actually cast their fireballs through, it can be very devastating for some of the players as random people get targeted by it. As we saw the imp spawn here, usually you need to coordinate stuns and silences properly. They do have a Demon Hunter which has the Chaos Nova, which is almost always ready for the stun, I believe, almost every single time.
I think Chaos Nova is a 40 or 45 second CD, and the imps are every 20-ish seconds, so every other.
The cooldown.
Oh yes, that's correct. Yeah. So it is available mostly every time. Imp spawn again here, absolutely imperative for the teams that they interrupt and DPS those properly. As you can see, the players do stack together to kind of bait the imp spawn location, making sure that they're not scattered all over the place. The players are the ones who control where the imps spawn, but you want to make sure you move out of those swirlies on the ground right away, else they will do a lot of damage and punt you up into the air.
It also has the Withering Soul cast from the boss that you need to interrupt. If you do not interrupt it, then the whole group gets a debuff that reduces your max HP, and of course you don't want that because there's a lot of AoE damage coming coming out. It is dispellable, but you don't want the healer dispel 5 people. It costs a lot of mana and it takes a long time to do so. So you should interrupt the boss and you should interrupt the imps at the same time or CC them somehow. We see Team PogChamp actually still on the last mini-boss, so they're quite far behind at this point.
Quite far behind. And Fat Shark Gear still has that advantage of GH that we've mentioned a few times, so that's even further ahead that they're going to be able to pull. I mean, you know, we always mention how important the death counter is between the two teams and how close we've seen some of the Masters, but in this case, Fat Shark Yes is just pulling ahead, and just look at that rogue damage coming out on Fat Shark Yes's side. This is a fight that's so well catered to rogues because, you know, the imp spawn and the rogue goes, hey, look at all these free combo points. I'm just going to get some extra single target damage in on the boss. Fat Shark Yes now moving in to kind of guess who the demon is in here. They do have the kind of, you know, cheesiness and cheating and help from the Havoc Demon Hunter, excuse me, with that Spectral Sight coming up. Team PogChamp only now pulling Talixay 90%.
Yeah, we also saw some players from Fat Shark Yes actually use the potion, what is it called? Sky Step, actually.
Yes.
Yeah, they use the Sky Step. So it's interesting to see that some people don't actually double potion during the boss fight to get that Sky Step right afterwards to be faster and get the spy faster. Like those small things, they matter in those kind of
Yeah, you know, that's a really smart play from them because some of those clues, the first clue is always right at the door, and then you have 2 on the left, 2 on the right, and at least one of them on either side is always at the very top of the balcony all the way around. So using that extra speed is actually really smart and probably netted them more time saved in this dungeon rather than using their second pot on Talixay there. The Suspicious Noble will now transform into the dreaded Dreadlord in just a moment, and they will have to DPS this mob down before they get access to the last boss of the dungeon.
Yeah, so this mini-boss here does cast a Shadow Bolt volley on the whole group over time. It does give you a debuff that increases the next Shadow Bolt volley, so you need to make sure that you go at the same direction, or you go all the way in melee range as we see here, because if you still have the debuff once the Shadow Bolt comes out, it does a lot more damage and you might actually die to it. But this mini-boss is not buffed as it is tyrannical and not fortified, so they shouldn't have a problem with the Shadow Bolt coming out here.
Fat Shark Yes downing the boss in just a moment. They'll get the key to open the door, which is typically what keys do. They open doors. They'll loot it in just a moment and head over to start the RP, which of course will not be the extended RP as they left one of those towers up on the first boss as we alluded to earlier in the dungeon, and then they will have access to Melandris, which is the last boss. Now, this is usually the boss Nagura that a lot of people are a bit scared about in a tyrannical setting, as every time he forms one of his images, his Maelstrom will pulse harder and harder on the group, so it's quite taxing on the hero. Quite a lot of work to do.
Yeah, there's a lot of AoE damage coming out. There's also, as you said, those like the charge or the tornadoes coming out that does target a ranged player. If every other ranged player is in melee and there's only one ranged outside, then it will always be that ranged player that gets targeted. So usually what we see a lot of teams do is have everyone in melee and one person go outside. But as it is a full melee group here coming out of Fat Shark Yes, they might do the strat that we saw one of the Chinese teams do, where they just have the charge in melee and they just move the boss around.
Yeah, that was actually really well done by them, and they kind of rotated the boss perfectly because you do have a finite amount of images that can spawn, if I'm not mistaken 6 or 7, so that once he starts spawning anything after 6, the first one will despawn, and you can only have so many. So there is a cap on the amount of damage that goes out on the group. We do see the Bloodlust come out of Fat Shark Yes, and we'll have Bloodlust available for Team PogChamp as well, as they are now waiting to find their demon as it's moving up the stairs. Advisor Melandris now at 70% for Fat Shark Yes, still 15 seconds of Bloodlust left. Or actually, excuse me, 3 seconds of Bloodlust left.
There's one thing to note as well, that both teams only get 2 Bloodlusts through this whole dungeon, and at the start we mentioned, oh, why are they not bloodlusting the first boss? But they planned it perfectly to have this bloodlust for the harbor pool, and then they got it right before this last boss here, so it was perfectly planned from Fat Shark Yes. Of course, it was also their dungeon pick. As we see the Paladin actually baiting the charge here, and they don't put
But missing it, unfortunately.
Yeah,
moved out a bit too late, so now they have that image right in where their stack spot usually is. And the reason they're moving away from the images is because during the slicing Maelstrom, not only is there pulsing damage on the group, but you also take increased damage, as you can see a little circle around those images and Melandris himself that do extra damage. So certainly if the group was standing right on top of those images, they would die immediately.
Yeah, then we also see those slices coming out of the ground as we see right now that you need to dodge. And if all the images are in one spot, then it's much easier to dodge so the whole room isn't filled with them. Then we also see those tornadoes spawn randomly in the dungeon, in the platform. And usually we have the tank or someone get rid of the tornadoes so people don't walk into them on accident. We also have Paladins play with Zephyr Secret sometimes, so the tank walks into it right before the slicing Maelstrom, and the Paladin dispels because it is a magic debuff, the tornado, that can be dispelled. And once you get the dispel, you proc your Zephyr Secret and you do do a lot more AoE healing for that slash into.
So if I'm not mistaken, you can actually have Cephas proc for every other. So it actually lines up really well when on one, likely the Holy Paladin if he's playing Cephas, while the Cephas proc, and on the other, you'll have consumption from that DK, having the leech on the group, helping with a lot of that pulsing damage. Melandris now sub 20% for Fat Shark. Yes, they're weathering this windy situation quite well. Team PogChamp only now just waiting for the RP to start on Melandris. I mean, at this point, Negura, you know, we said when we get to this point, but they're really just hoping for a wipe from Fat Shark, yes, in order to be able to take this map. Otherwise, we're going to be seeing a Game 3 here in a moment.
Yeah, one thing to mention is though that Team PogChamp only does have one death, so they did play the dungeon pretty cleanly. They were just a little bit slower, maybe not as prepared as Fat Shark Yes was, obviously because it wasn't their pick, but they did still play clean and didn't have any unnecessary wipes.
I mean, Fat Shark Yes downing Melandris right now, and Team PogChamp will have 5 seconds to do 92% on the boss. And you know what, Rob? According to my math, I don't think that'll be enough time.
Quick maths.
I'm not much of quick maths. I'm not much of a math guy either, but I tend to side with you on that one. And Fat Shark Yes managing to equalize on their pick, and that's really what you want to see there, right? They came in with a strat, and everything about that pick just was slanted a little bit more in their favor. They clearly had a more clean approach to how they were actually getting to the dungeon itself. It felt like the bosses maybe played more to that rogue pick. So, I mean, that's about what you'd expect, and cool to see them equalize, but now they really head into what I would say is the most dangerous part of this exchange for them, which is they now have to win on Team PogChamp's pick, both map and affix. So this is where the challenge gets even more challenging.
That's where the huge advantage of winning that first map really just comes in, and we talk about it every week. And I mean, there's nothing more to say about it. There's just a huge advantage for Team PogChamp right now. I don't really expect that we'll see. I think it's kind of hard to counter the other team. You know, it's easier to counter in kind of a 4 DPS situation with no healer. I don't really expect we'll see as much counter, except maybe, you know, some minor play. I mean, the Volcanic, you know, countered a bit more the casters on PogChamp, but nonetheless, we'll probably see just a comfort pick, I would say.
Yeah, we'll definitely see what they choose to do and how they're going to try to win this series. Team PogChamp, though, will have some things going in their favor when we come back. And well played from Fat Shark Yes, as they did manage to equalize. What happens, we'll find out after this short break. Welcome back. We have an even series on our hand, and we're going to be heading into the third map, which we did find out over the break is going to be an Altharian. So I think this kind of lines up with a little bit of what we were expecting. PogChamp, Kirsty's European time broadcasters. Jeez.
I'll be taking over as host.
We'll just switch. No one's going to notice if we do. Yeah. PogChamp, though, that makes sense. You know, on Mauve Souls, they clearly showed that when it just comes down to doing a lot of damage, having a map that's like fairly, you don't have to put a whole lot of thinking into the pulls, maybe. It's fairly well defined at this point. They definitely succeeded. So I'm not super surprised to see that.
I don't know. Nelth does have a lot. I mean, Mauve Souls is just such a pre-rehearsed, you know, limited dungeon in terms of creativity. I think Nelth's lair actually is very open-ended in that sense. There's a lot of options you could do with the trash leading up to pretty much all of the bosses. Actually, there's some skippable or some pullable trash, so it's gonna be interesting to see what teams opt to skip. And one team has a rogue in favor of Fat Shark, yes, whereas Team PogChamp does not. So they'll have to. Well, they don't have to, but it's gonna be interesting to see where and if they use that Invis pod.
They also picked Explosive, which is interesting because it's one of the affixes that you can pick that actually do something. It's not like Volcanic where it's like, oh, I can just ignore this one. Explosive is actually quite difficult to deal with, especially if you don't practice that one in a certain dungeon. And they have a triple melee coming out of Fat Shark, yes. And as we know, melees are a little bit, they have a harder time dealing with the explosives if they spawn far away from where the melees are or where the mobs are. Depending on the bosses, you can get some pretty bad spawns, especially on the Worm boss where you get the Pelter spawn from the top. They can get explosives in the back. Of course, you do have a Holy Paladin, which can deal with them pretty easily, but it might get out of hand on some pulls.
Yeah, for sure. I guess what I mean is this didn't really feel like any kind of like curveball pick. You know, we've seen last year people want to go towards Black Rogue Hold if they think they needed to shake someone up a little bit. We did see that Court of Stars pick, which is a little more technical play oriented, whereas Nelth, for the most part, I do feel like it's a fairly solved dungeon. Obviously, it was one of the first dungeons that came out with the expansion, so.
Sure, no, I totally agree, but the biggest issue, I think, I totally agree with Nagura as well, will be that explosive. Typically, we see teams in this dungeon just do the entire 32% pull right at the top with the Hulk, with everything. We got the Basilisk, everything at the top, and it's going to be really tough, especially with all those small skitter spiders doing that kind of pull and keeping the explosive under control. Wouldn't be shocked to see if one of the teams splits it in two, or of course a more old school strat in 2017 kind of thing would be to get the first part of the dungeon with the scorpions and the worms and then kind of skip to the side along the river and just omit the Hulk.
Are we officially saying 2017 MDI is now old school?
I had hair back then.
In 2000, you did not.
No,
we hung out in 2017. Neither of us had hair. But, you know, Fat Shark, yes, they looked fairly close in that Mauve Souls run, so this definitely feels like it's in the realm of possibility for them to pull this off. It will, I agree with you, Nagura. I think it's going to come down to really the management of the explosive orbs. Yeah,
especially because it is their pick, so I'm pretty sure PogChamp has practiced this dungeon a lot, especially with the explosive pick extra. So you said earlier they have a really big advantage. If you win that first map, then obviously everyone practices the first map because it is chosen by Blizzard, everything is set by Blizzard, so everyone is going to practice the same map. But if you win that first one, then you only have to practice one more map, as if you lose the second, then you can pick the third as your own, and then you just have a very big advantage. And I think at this point they should win if they practice it well.
I will have to see what happens. We're going to hop into the game again. Fat Shark, yes, taking on Team PogChamp. The winner of this advances. The loser goes down to the lower bracket. Well, obviously, they will have a substantially more challenging time getting to that land final. So we'll have to see what happens between these two teams in Altharian's Lair. A map that, like we've said, we've certainly seen a fair bit of in both this and last year's MDI.
Yeah, it's a standard pick map. It's there with Darkheart Thicket and Mauve.
Yeah, really all the core 7-0 set as we like to look at. Like, what do we consider the easiest maps? Yeah. All right, well, as we continue to wait for the players to get a little bit more situated, yeah,
preparing.
Got Team PogChamp, but I got Team Jebaited a little bit there. So we are going to head into that map, though. Second time's the charm. I'm not going to get Jebaited again. Let's go.
So, I mean, Nelth, we're going to go right down the water slide of fun. What is it with these dungeons and having this RP at the start that, you know, we got the boat ride now, we got the water slide.
I guess those two teams just really like the RP.
What can I say, I guess? I mean, the European. Oh, that was horrible. Now, in this dungeon, we are in the fortified setting, so there's a lot of dangerous trash that almost, I mean, it has to do with the tank, of course, in terms of getting aggro and kiting them and getting the distance away from them. But some mobs to look out for, and we'll discuss them as we get there, Nagura, you know, things like the Pelters and the Scorpions. Really dangerous mobs for the dungeons. The Berserkers with their Avalanche as well. Really curious to see what comes out of both teams here with the pull here at the first dungeon. Usually we see everything pulled here, as we discussed, with that explosive affix is really dangerous, though.
I think they don't care about explosive and actually okay, they're not pulling the whole thing as we see here. They actually stop right before the big golems here. Of course, if you pull everything, there's going to be way too many explosives to deal with. So they choose the safe way and just do a little bit of a smaller pull. But it's still pretty big, and you can see the lurkers here to actually burrow themselves and come on a ranged player's position. So we saw both Dr. J and Shella, the two ranged players, actually stack in melee with everyone else, so the lurkers don't go really far away once they unburrow. Well
done by both of them, and both teams really trying to keep a bit more conservative play here as they don't pull the Hulk and kind of mini Hulk on the side there. It's kind of like me and Robert, actually, a big guy and a small guy. So they don't pull those because it's just too much to manage with the explosive. Although these players, I'm sure, you know, can tap target or click target, whatever they may do, very effectively. These are good players. Even if they can pull that off, it's just so much damage lost, constantly needing to babysit these orbs and not really getting the effective damage in that you need on the trash. Both teams now, actually, Fatshark is moving over to the Hulk, and they're actually not pulling that bridge part. I'm not sure why with it, so they might opt to skip those remaining 4 mobs and go straight to Rockmore, the first boss, where Team PogChamp on the left side is actually just ignoring all of that and going straight down.
We might see Fatshark actually pull those drop bars with the boss for the rogue, for the more damage. Sometimes the boss tends to reset if you pull those rock bars, but I think it got changed and it doesn't actually reset anymore, as we saw a team in another region do that pull with their rogue coming out. Of course, it increases your single target by quite a bit, and you have this bloodlust as well. So pulling some mobs to the boss is very, very helpful for the rogue group.
Team PogChamp now playing Rockmora, paper, scissors. Things to watch out for on this boss. He will have a frontal that the tank will need to avoid. Or, of course, you can use your AMS as the Blood DK, get a bit more ruining power out of it. He will have, most importantly, this AoE Stomp Nagura that not only innately does a ton of damage, but also increases in intensity as more skitterers are alive. So it's really important for this team, both teams actually, to make sure these skitterers die. Really shouldn't be a problem for them, especially with that Fire Mage Ignite cleave going on.
Yeah, it's also fortified, so the bosses don't do more damage. They're not buffed by Tyrannical, but the Shatter actually does physical damage, while the explosion from the skitters, depending on how much HP they have left, actually does magical damage. So if you have a lot of armor, you can't be like, oh, let me just pop this armor thing and it won't matter, because it's both schools of the magic and physical that do damage on that Shatter, so they have to be very careful to not leave too many skitters alive.
I mean, big difference in damage here between the two groups, over 50% differential. Rockmora now down to 17% for Team PogChamp on the right side. Fatshark, yes, of course, having used Bloodlust as well, having Rockmora down to 60% now. Team PogChamp, I like what they're doing here. They're starting to slowly move the boss to the exit of the area so that they can get in that barrel ride all the faster and save, as we always say, those precious seconds, because it really comes down to that for a lot of these maps. Rockmora now falling for Team PogChamp, and they head over to the barrels.
Yeah, so Fatshark is a little bit behind, but as we can see, they did pull those rock bars to the boss actually, and both teams, of course, used their Bloodlust for the boss, so they're still behind a little bit. They do have more trash percentage, but just slightly. It's just 4% more.
I mean, 4% really equates to some of the later mobs being just really 1 or 2 mobs. I mean, yeah. The spiders, excuse me, that's a rich thing to say. The Scorpions themselves at the end of the dungeon, if I'm not mistaken, give 4.5 each, so that's just 1 extra Scorpion. Of course, not the best mob that you want to be pulling in this situation. Team PogChamp hugging the right side of this cave as they lead up to the second boss. Typically what we see from teams here is a really big pull on top of the first Pelter pack, so expect to see the Pelters plus these Berserkers on the side, and maybe even the Hulk in the back. Oftentimes team pull it, AoE grip everything together as we're seeing here, and then just do as much damage as they can. But once again, Nagura, the babysitting of the explosives here.
Yeah, so they did pull the Hulk. They actually also pulled the Pelters on the right side. As they skipped some mobs earlier before Rockmora, they actually skipped some mobs, so they have to make up for that trash percentage somewhere else. As we can see here, doing a very, very big pull. The tank is hiding now at this point. He's also interrupting the drummer. If you don't interrupt the drummer, then you actually get an extra mob spawning, so it's very important to do so. We also see the Warlock, which we never mentioned before, actually, that has the the option to equip the ring, the legendary ring that does slow the mobs if you dot them, and it's very, very good for this dungeon here in Altarian's Lair, as you want to do those big pulls and just kite the pelters, so they get slowed and the tank just walks really far away, kites them, and then they don't cast their discs on random players, which does do a lot of damage, especially on fortified.
Yeah, especially in the fortified, right you are. Now, every mob here can get slowed except for the Hulk. So you did see the Hulk run over to the tank, and the tank did have to kind of solo deal with it. The Hulk does a fracture punt and then a huge magic frontal that adds a pretty substantial 10-second magic dot to that tank. But as long as it's interrupted after the fracture before it gets its cast off, it's really not a problem for the tank. Blood DK is being well equipped to do this, as that cast comes every 15 to 17 seconds. Death Grip, of course, for DK's 15-second cooldown, so they will be able to basically solo manage that Hulk while the rest of the group slows all those pelters, making sure that they don't reach the group. They're opting to finish the Hulk here for Team PogChamp first, as they will likely get ready with a Gorfine's Grasp 90-second cooldown to do another mass pull in this next room, leading up to Ularog, the second boss that ominously sits on that ledge there and looks at them.
It actually took them quite a while to finish off that Hulk. As I said, it doesn't get slowed, so it walks out of all the AoE that is happening on the pelters in the back. So they lost quite a bit of time to finish off this Hulk. One more thing to mention is also that in theory, Team PogChamp could chain pull without getting out of combat in between. Of course, you don't get the second pot in between, and you don't get the timer rolling, so you don't really want to do that. But it's not as punishing as it is for Team Fatshark, yes, as there's a rogue, and a rogue always wants to re-stealth and get out of combat, so you can't do those chain pulls if you would choose to do so. So
in line with what you were saying, Team PogChamp there, it's almost as if they heard you. They actually tried to stun the Hulk in that big AoE group this time, even though the tank was long gone after the initial pull. Stun the Hulk on top of all those pelters, making sure they get as much cleave damage as possible. Team PogChamp now opting to pull Ularog right away. Now, there are a couple of mobs left over. We can see a Shaper on the side. If I'm not mistaken, there's a Pelter in the corner as well. No, yeah, they killed the Pelter, actually. So there is the Shaper on the side, which not too dangerous of a mob as long as he's interrupted Stone Bolt. So they might pull it along with the boss or during the transition phase of the boss, which happens at 100% on Ularog. He will submerge, and then you will have to kind of play guess the ball under the cup, in this case totems, of course, and once you guess the right totem, he will re-emerge.
Yeah, so this phase that you're talking about actually takes quite a long time, and you lose a lot of time overall by not doing anything, of course, because there's nothing to damage other than maybe pulling some trash. So the less phases you get, the better it is, especially if one team would get one extra phase and the other team doesn't, you actually gain a lot of time, and we'll see how that goes. Of course, both teams do not have Bloodlust available, but we see a lot of damage coming out of the Windwalker here in the first phase.
Yeah, so I mean, if they can skip one of these extra down phases, a ton of time saved for them. I mean, look, all this time, the boss is not accessible except for the remaining dots that are taken on him from the Fire Mage and, of course, from the Warlock. They do guess the right one, fortunately, something I never managed to do because I frankly never pay attention, make somebody else do it instead. Ularog now resurfaces at 72 or 75% actually when he resurfaces. I'm not sure they're going to be able to beat the timer and get another and skip that second phase. We'll have to see. It is a fortified setting and they are doing a lot of damage, but if they can pull it off, that would be huge for them. Fatshark, yes, only now moving over to Ularog and getting ready to pull.
Yeah, so they're quite a bit behind now at this point, but they have a lot more health. We also see them pull
the Shaper that we were talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Earlier, yeah. They pulled the Shaper and Team PogChamp. But what we didn't mention before is Fatshark, yes, actually is almost 80% trash, while Team PogChamp is only sitting on 60%. So Team PogChamp actually needs to do some more trash. And we see Musclebra die, actually the Windwalker died. They do have a Battle Rest, unfortunately, but it's their last one, so they're not going to be out of Battle Rests for a while now.
You certainly don't want to shake hands with those stone hands coming up from Ularog. Unfortunately, Musclebra did just that, takes that 5-second penalty for the team. Now there's only a 5-second difference between the two teams in terms of death. Yeah, but I don't think Fatshark has used their mass stealth yet, if I'm not mistaken, so it's probably something that they're going to opt to use probably after Neuraxis, sometime and skip most of the trash. We'll see if they do anything cheeky with the trash before the last boss, but they do indeed have that mass stealth option left to them and a 19% trash advantage. As we predicted, Team PogChamp not able to skip the second transition phase. Ularog going down again at 20%, so not even close for them in that regard.
Yeah, so they have to somehow make up this trash. As you said, they pulled a lot earlier. Fatshark, I guess, pulled a lot, so they're probably going to do the mass skip later on with the Shrouds. But as we saw some other team do on the very last boss, they actually skipped those Scorpions because, of course, if you pull the boss, they're linked to the boss, those two trash packs right in front. But you can skip them if you have a Hunter or a Rogue that pulls them.
Or a Mage.
Or a Mage. Oh, yeah, Mage actually works too. He can invis.
Our good friends Team PogChamp do have a Mage, but they're also the ones who are behind on trash. They do move up here in a moment. Now, because they're behind on trash, typically we do see teams kind of pull these Basilisks on the side, or Richardiles as we tend to dub them in the previous MDI. They do give it a bit of free percentage, and do a bit of some substantial damage to the tank. Nothing too bad, though. So somebody will kind of run over, pull those, oftentimes one of the ranged, while the Blood DK will prep to pull the rest of the room, expecting to see a pretty big pull out there. So indeed, the Warlock does run over, dot each one of them, and then will hurry back to the tank, making sure that he doesn't get hit by those. Ularog going down at 18%, so slightly higher amount of single target damage coming out of Fat Shark, yes, but nonetheless, they do have to deal with the second transition phase.
Yeah, and the second, the same amount of transition phases for both teams, so none of the teams is going to save too much time from that one. Of course, they do have a little bit. Oh, we see Loaf is dying here, so we see the Monk.
A Windwalker again.
The Windwalkers just like dying a lot, I guess. They do have trouble a little bit with survivability, of course, compared to a Rogue who just perma feints and cheat death and.
Or compared to like anything, you know.
Anything, yeah.
So Loaf is going down. They do have to use their battle res as well, so kind of mirrored gameplay from both teams on Ularog performance. Tank doing well there to rotate the boss up to 90 degrees after that first totem spawns to make sure that both totems are spawned on top of each other. The players get good cleave, and Fat Shark, yes, successfully downs Ularog. Only one death on the board coming out of that fight, and they do move over. Huge pull coming up here from Team PogChamp now as they opt to deal with these small worms, hoping to kill them quickly so they don't have to babysit too many explosives.
We actually saw, I think we saw an Invis potion come out of Team PogChamp here, which is interesting because they only skipped 2 mobs, I believe.
Yeah, it was like the little geode and the two mobs.
Yeah, so maybe they chose to invest here so they can pull this trash to the boss as we see them pull everything to the boss here. This is a pretty big pull. They have to be careful with the fell explosives here. They still do not have Bloodlust. They still have a 40 seconds cooldown on it, so they're only going to get 1 more use out of it, so 2 Bloodlusts in total, and yeah, they're probably going to use it on the last boss.
Naraxis, pet worm of Jiraxis now is what this team is facing. Now, a couple of notables here. Obviously immobile, as he is a giant worm erecting out of the ground right now. They do have to sit there in DPS, so the melee are kind of trapped in the front, and they will spawn those kind of devouts from the top edges of the platform, which you do have access to DPS before they jump down. But they will slowly make their way to the boss, 2 of them. Each one that gets successfully eaten by Naraxis will buff the boss by 50% increased damage for the remainder of the phase. Also, there is a spiked chain that will, spiked tongue if I'm not mistaken it's called, that will come out of the boss and try to grab the tank towards them, as we see here on the screen right now for Team PogChamp. If the tank also gets eaten here, not only is it a ton of damage on the tank, but another 50% buff on top of it for the boss. So this boss's damage can get really out of hand, especially with all that splash AoE damage, Nergura coming out of the poison as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of AoE damage going on this boss. There's a lot of poison debuffs, as we can see here right now on the groups. Usually the Windwalker can help dispelling the debuff. Usually he dispels himself because, as we said, Windwalker is not very good at surviving things. They don't have a lot of defensive cooldowns. So usually we see the spells coming out here, but it is a global and it costs you damage, so we didn't see the dispel come out as it is fortified. So usually the healer can heal his spells on fortified side. It's also a 22 dungeon, not later on where we get to the 23 and 24s. So, but we see the Paladin actually drop really, really low on mana here.
Yeah, and you know, we mentioned the kind of devout eating, and the team's really not opting to kill these devouts at all. I think that's the second or third one that Naraxis has eaten, so there's a lot of damage. And Naraxis gets a natural soften rage buff at 20% for, I believe, 20% increased damage done. So no wonder that everyone's getting so low and the Paladin's out of mana. I mean, everyone's just needing a ton of healing because the team's, oh my god, a lot of damage coming out. Elsrad barely hanging on, 7%, trying to heal themselves up, get as much health as possible. Dr. J using that ice block to get rid of that poison. The poison's just ticking for immense amounts of damage. The team really looking for a gamble here, and pulling it off because they had to kill that boss. Like, they opted not to kill any of the mobs, let the boss stack the damage just so they can tunnel as much single target. Worked out for them in the end. No deaths, but we do see the ice block used from Dr. J and the LOH coming out of Elsrat in the meantime. Yeah,
that was actually a very, very risky strat to just ignore those ads, and just, as we saw, the healer was for a really long time at the very end, and it is Grievous as well, so we saw him struggling to heal up those Grievous stacks. We saw some people with 5 stacks of Grievous. Of course, Grievous, if you don't heal people up to 90% plus HP once they have the debuff, then it's going to stack up more and more until it reaches 5, and it ticks for more and more damage. So, of course, it's not a very good thing to have the healer out of mana at this fight, but they managed to pull it off. Right, you are, Negura. They do pull this Trapper group here. Now, the Trappers are kind of cousins of the Pelters, super Pelters, if you will. They have the same mechanics as the Pelters, but on top of it, they will cast a stun on the tank. So we're not surprised to see similar strategy coming out of Team PogChamp here as they pull everything away and the tank runs away. Fat Shark, yes, dealing with Naraxis on the right
right side of the screen, 27%, and they're already finished all of their trash percentage. So we can expect out of them to see pretty much a mass skip for the remainder of the room, and either some kind of trickiness with the Scorpions in the last boss's room where the rogue perhaps pulls them to the side and vanishes while somebody else pulls the boss, or maybe they just cleave everything down.
Yeah, this might actually be really close still, as there's 12% missing for Team PogChamp, so they do have to kill this trash here unless they choose to pull something else. But
I think they're going for it.
They might just pull the boss with it, which would be very, very risky. This is 45, so they're not pulling the boss. But as we see, Thatcher, I guess, is still on... Oh, they actually used Bloodlust for this pull here, which makes sense. It's a very scary pull with the double Scorpions and the Pelter as well to do a lot of damage overall. And it is Grievous too, so it is a lot of damage on the group. But as we said, Thatcher, I guess, already has 100% enemy forces. So with the Rogue here, they might just manage to skip everything, and they might pull ahead here at this point. They do have 2 more deaths though, but they also have Bloodlust available, and if they only have to do the boss at this point, it's actually closer than it looks like.
Team PogChamp clawing away those Scorpions. They do manage to get them down. Nice clean pull. All of the Bloodlust is now consumed, and they do move over and pull Dark Gruul, the final boss of the dungeon. This boss is going to take a while. Once he reaches 100% energy, he does a huge molten pulse on the group that players will need to hide behind these crystallized walls, as we just saw a moment ago. The tank doing well to turn the boss there appropriately, because if the giants, the molten giants that he spawns, hits one of those walls, it will get stunned for about 10 seconds and take 100% increased damage, which is the window of opportunity the players want to use to DPS it down. Now, I believe it's usually 3 crystal walls per phase, so they can use one of them for the giant, sometimes 2 if the giant takes too long, and then use the last one, of course, to hide behind.
Yeah, so you got to be careful here. You don't want to over DPS this ad, obviously. So a lot of DPS want, oh, it has a 100% damage increase. I need to switch on it right now to do more overall damage.
I do.
But they just want to kill it right in time, because of course you also want to have boss damage. So you shouldn't be wasting more damage than you need on this ad, so you actually kill the boss faster. We see Lofus die here, the Windwalker. They do have a battle rest, so they got him up immediately, but now they're out of battle rest, and he actually lost the Bloodlust too.
Yeah, he lost about 10 seconds of Bloodlust because he died at 9:30 on that timer, so that's another death 5 seconds. It's looking really good in favor of Team PogChamp right now on the left side of the screen as they hide behind the wall for their first Magma Smash. Now, there is also a landslide attack that happens on the tank where there will be a massive frontal, as we see it there on the screen right now on the left side. Tank will then need to return and make sure to have active mitigation before that molten crash. Otherwise, they will get punted and take increased damage. The Magma Wave coming up soon again for Team PogChamp on the left side. Fatshark is trying to chew through as much of boss percentage as they can, but not only do they need to kill the boss first, but they need to kill it 15 seconds faster than Team PogChamp, and that's looking like a pretty daunting task right now.
Yeah, they do have that rogue damage, as we talked about earlier, and Windwalker Demon Hand. There's a lot of single target damage coming out of Fatshark, yes, but they are still 30% behind pretty much, so it's going to be very, very difficult for them to catch up, especially because this Windwalker died and lost so much time of this Bloodlust. And we see PogChamp playing very cleanly, only 1 death so far, only Musclebra died on that second boss, so they're having a very clean run here.
Things heating up here again with the Burning Hatred and the Magma coming out of the boss, but it should be no trouble, excuse me, for Team PogChamp as they are able to down Dark Gruul right now and take the series 2-1, Mr. Rob.
Yeah, Team PogChamp is now going to be advancing to the winner's upper bracket there, so congratulations to them. Really cleanly